The Chimes, by Charles Dickens. From the collection of stories published in 1844, this tale unfolds in Victorian England, where the great church bells become witnesses to a poor man's journey through despair and redemption. High above the narrow streets of a grimy industrial city, where smoke from countless chimneys painted the sky in shades of gray and soot, the great bells of the church tower hung in their ancient frame like massive bronze guardians. Their voices had called out the hours for centuries, marking births and deaths, joys and sorrows, the endless march of time that touched all who dwelt below. Toby Veck, known to all as Trotty, hurried through the bitter December wind, his thin coat offering little protection against the cold that seemed to seep into his very bones. At 65, his back was bent from years of labor, his weathered hands rough from carrying messages and parcels for anyone willing to pay a few pence. But his eyes still held a spark of kindness, and his step, though hurried, carried the determined rhythm that had earned him his nickname. He murmured to himself as the bell's deep tones resonated through the frosty air.
The bells. They know me. They've got my name down pat. Toby Veck, they say. That's me.
Trotty believed the bells spoke to him, that they knew his heart and understood his struggles. In their bronze voices, he heard encouragement when the world seemed dark, hope when despair threatened to overwhelm him. They were his friends in a city where friendship was a luxury few could afford. At his usual post outside the church, Trotty stamped his feet and blew on his fingers, waiting for work that might not come. His daughter Meg would be expecting him home soon, and he had little to show for a day's effort. At 19, Meg was the light of his life, beautiful despite their poverty, full of dreams despite their circumstances. She was engaged to Richard, a young blacksmith whose strong hands and honest heart had won Trotty's approval, though the old man wondered how they would ever manage to marry on their meager earnings. A voice sweet as spring water in the dry desert of the winter streets called out,
"Father."
Trotty turned to see Meg approaching, her face glowing with excitement, her worn shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Behind her walked Richard, his muscular frame moving with the confident gait of a man accustomed to honest labor. Trotty embraced her warmly.
My dear girl, you shouldn't be out in this cold.
"We have news, Father. Richard has found better work at the foundry. We can marry next month."
But their joy was soon interrupted by the harsh voice of Alderman Cute, a pompous official who had stopped to observe their reunion with obvious disapproval. He was a man whose well-fed frame and expensive clothes spoke of comfort unknown to the likes of Trotty Veck. He snorted with disdain.
Marriage? You people never learn. More mouths to feed, more bodies to clothe, more misery to add to the world. Mark my words, no good will come of it.
Sir, we work honestly for our bread.
Honestly. And what does that matter? You'll have children you cannot feed, fall into debt, turn to crime. I've seen it 1,000 times. The poor are born to be poor, and marriage only makes more poor.
Trotty felt his spirit crushed by these words, though he tried to shield his daughter from their cruel weight. As Cute walked away, muttering about the futility of the lower classes, Trotty found himself doubting everything he had believed about hope, about love, about the possibility that life could be better. That evening, as New Year's Eve approached and the church bells began their midnight chiming, Trotty climbed the winding stone steps to the bell tower. He had been asked to deliver a letter to the old sexton, but the man was nowhere to be found. As the great bells thundered overhead, Their bronze voices suddenly seemed different, not encouraging, but accusatory. They seemed to say,
You have no right to hope. You are nothing but a burden, a drain on society. Look at your life. What good have you ever done?
overwhelmed by despair, by the weight of Cute's words and his own perceived failures, Trotty stumbled toward the tower's edge. The bells grew louder, more insistent, until their voices became a roar that filled his skull and drowned out all other thought. Suddenly, he found himself falling, not through space, but through time itself. The spirits of the bells, ancient and terrible and wise, had taken hold of him, determined to show him the truth of his words and beliefs. A voice like thunder rapped in bronze commanded,
See. See what becomes of those you love when hope dies.
Before Trotty's horrified eyes, the future unfolded like a terrible tapestry. Meg, convinced by her father's despair that there was no point in marriage, had lived unmarried with Richard. Shunned by society, they had fallen into poverty deeper than any Trotty had ever known. Their child, born into a world that saw her as shameful, grew up wild and desperate. Trotty watched in anguish as his beloved daughter, broken by hardship and social condemnation, threw herself from a bridge into the dark waters below rather than face another day of suffering. He saw Richard, maddened by loss, strike down the man who had wronged them and face the gallows for his crime.
No, this cannot be. I would never counsel despair. I would never take hope from those I love.
But the bells showed him more. A world where the poor accepted their fate without question, where no one dared to dream of better things, where the aldermen and officials ruled unchallenged because those below them had given up the will to strive, to hope, to believe in change. The spirit voices intoned,
This is the world you help create when you listen to those who say the poor are born to be poor, when you accept that misery is natural and hope is foolishness.
I was wrong. Show me mercy. Let me undo this terrible future.
as if in response to his plea, the vision began to shift and blur. The bells' voices grew gentler, more melodious, carrying with them the promise of dawn after the darkest night. They sang,
Hear us rightly. We do not counsel despair, but hope. We do not preach acceptance of injustice, but the need to fight for what is right. The poor are not born to be poor. They are made poor by those who refuse to see their humanity. What you have seen is but one possible future, the future that comes when hope dies. But it need not be. It will not be if you choose differently.
the bells' voices swelled into a glorious chorus that seemed to shake the very foundations of the tower. Light burst around Trotty like 1,000 suns, and he felt himself falling, falling through the luminous air.
Father, Father, wake up.
Trotty's eyes flew open. He was lying on the floor of his small room at home, not in the bell tower at all. Sunlight, blessed, beautiful sunlight, streamed through the window, and there was Meg, alive and radiant, kneeling beside him with tears of worry on her cheeks.
Meg, you're alive. You're here.
Of course I'm here, Father. You gave us such a fright. We found you collapsed last night when we came to see you. The doctor said you had some kind of fit. But you're awake now, and on my wedding day, too.
Your wedding day? Then none of it has happened? The despair, the poverty,
None of what, Father? You've been dreaming. But never mind that now. It's New Year's Day, and Richard and I are to be married this very afternoon. We wanted your blessing before we go to the church.
Trotty pulled his daughter into a fierce embrace, tears streaming down his weathered face.
My blessing? My dear girl, you have all my blessings, all my love, all my encouragement. Marry your Richard. Be happy. Build a life together. Never, never let anyone tell you that your love is worthless or your hope is foolish.
Richard appeared in the doorway, his honest face creased with concern.
Mr. Veck, sir, are you well enough for the ceremony? We can postpone if.
Postpone? Not for all the world. Today, my daughter marries the finest young man in England, and I'll be there to dance at the wedding if it's the last thing I do.
The small church was decorated simply but beautifully with evergreen boughs and winter flowers. The bells, those same bells that had shown Trotty such terrible visions, now rang out with voices of pure celebration, their tones sweet and joyous, as they called the small congregation to witness the union. As Meg and Richard stood before the vicar, their hands clasped together, their faces glowing with love and hope, Trotty felt his heart swell almost to bursting. He understood now what the bells had been trying to teach him. They had not shown him the future as it would be, but as it could be if hope and love were abandoned. They had shown him the price of despair, and in doing so, had taught him the infinite value of hope. The vicar intoned,
I pronounce you husband and wife.
and the bells pealed out in triumphant chorus. At the modest celebration that followed, even Alderman Cute appeared, drawn perhaps by curiosity or by some touch of the season's spirit. When he began to make some sour comment about the improvidence of young love, Trotty stepped forward.
Begging your pardon, sir, but I must disagree. These young people have honest work and honest hearts. They may not be rich in coin, but they're rich in everything that truly matters. And I'll thank you not to poison their joy with talk of despair.
Cute looked startled, as if he'd never been contradicted by someone of Trotty's station. For a moment, anger flashed across his face, but then, perhaps seeing the determination in the old man's eyes, or perhaps touched by the genuine happiness in the room, he simply nodded and turned away. As the winter sun set on that New Year's Day, Trotty sat by the fire with Meg on one side and Richard on the other. The bells rang out the evening hour, and in their voices he heard not accusation or despair, but a song of hope that would never die as long as people had the courage to believe in better days. He whispered to the bells, so softly that no one else could hear.
Thank you for showing me what could be lost, so I could appreciate what remains to be saved.
And the bells rang on, their message clear for all who had ears to hear it, that hope is not foolishness but necessity, that love is not weakness but strength, and that every human being, no matter how poor, how humble, how forgotten, carries within them the divine spark of possibility, waiting only for belief to kindle it into flame. Dickens wrote the Chimes as a direct response to the harsh social policies of his era, particularly those that blamed the poor for their poverty. The story's message that hope and human dignity must be preserved even in the face of systemic injustice continues to resonate in contemporary discussions about social welfare and economic inequality. Today, the tale serves as a reminder that despair can be as destructive as any external force, while hope remains one of humanity's most powerful tools for social change.